The O Cannabis Conference and Expo returns to Toronto June 1st through the 3rd, and there's still some good booth locations available. This exciting event is free for cannabis retailers and will feature Tommy Chong receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award at the O Cannabis Industry Awards. For more information about exhibiting or to register to attend, go to ocannabis.com. That's OCANNABIZ.com.
We're looking for like a correction happening. I think that's why the AI probably sold most of them.
Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, capital markets analyst and host of your Cannabis Business Podcast. Back on the podcast with us is Rohit Shrivastava. He is the Chief Investment Officer and Portfolio Manager with Saroj & Banu Fund, but he's going to talk about C3 Fund, a new fund from the SEC that just got approval well, I'll let him talk about it right after the disclosure. Rohit, thanks for being back on the podcast.
Thanks, Josh, for having me, and thanks for all the work we did together in the last 5 to 10 months. We have been doing this, and we're at a point where we're calling this a C3 fund, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But first, the disclosure that this is all for entertainment. This is all for learning. We're not giving any financial advice. If you're interested in understanding more, you can reach out to me or Josh, either of us, and understand what we really do about this. Well, first, let me give you an overview about what we have here, and we'll talk about what we usually talk about every week. So this is a C3 fund, and the three industries which we focus on is the cannabis, Chinese industry, and the chips industries. The silicon industry, like Intel or any of those. We have this established. We have been talking about focused on cannabis, and our this podcast is going to be focused on cannabis going forward as well. But this C3 fund is a fund which we have established and registered with SEC, which focuses completely on cannabis and the other two industries. So that's the good news. And going forward, we'll be representing this as a C3 fund status update, or what is happening in this fund and what we invested and stuff like that. We talk about two indexes in this. The one is the cannabis index, which is like we've told before, that it's like a VIX, which gives you an idea about how the volatility in the cannabis index is happening, is what we feel is a good time to get in or good time to get out and stuff like that. So this is an equally weighted index, and we had been doing this for months now, and this was when we started the inception of that, and we give a price value to that, and which is right now at 475, around 475, which is a very strong support, very strong resistance or support. So it had been fluctuating a lot in earlier in 2018, in end of 2018, early 2019, it basically tested that, and somewhere between the last 6 months, it had been fluctuating that, but in the last couple of months, it basically dropped, and it's now back to that. Now, what I anticipate is that this is a point where it'll probably do some correction, which is like people who had invested way here are trying to take some profit out of that. Or people who basically had invested at these points might be tired of these industry and trying to get out of that. So that's probably my inclination, is that I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a small sell-off after that of these equities. From the cash flow perspective, it is going through the same trend. Like, look at this, there was a huge cash coming in, a lot of buying happening, and this week it still continued to buy, but it is forming a trend, and it looks like I feel that it might, this is a confirmation for us, is that it might revert back a little bit, which is like a little bit of cash out might be happening, and which cash flow might still stay positive above this the average daily trade value, but I think there's going to be a little bit of profit taking at this point. That's what the trend feels like. From our AI-based cannabis index, this is the actual index where money is invested and buy and sell happens. On this one, last week we were holding more than about like 7 or 8 equities. This historically, if you go back to all our blogs, this is the first time we actually were holding so many equities at the same time. And This week, most of them sold this week, this last 7 days. Most of them sold except one, which we actually bought at the end, like very recently. So we like I said earlier that we're looking for like a correction happening. I think that's why the AI probably sold most of them and just holding in the hold position of that. But this week was overall good for not just for our AI index, but also for all the other uh, cannabis-based indexes you might be following. So from a status perspective, we only holding one. We sold most of them. That's about like 10 of them. And we actually sold one more, bought and sold during this time. And we're around, you can see that, hoping 53% from year to date on that. And this last week, this last 10 days, you can see that the MJ and POTX, they both gained about 7+%, and we gained not as much as them. But again, you got to compare a long-term. You can see the long-term analysis of year to date for all the the other two indexes versus ours. This month probably was the best month so far for a long time, after a long time for the cannabis industry. I mean, you can see that that's really the start of the month, they were about like negative 30%, 36%, and they have recovered a lot. Like now there's still a lot to recover, but from a recovery's perspective, I think they have recovered a lot. So overall, where we stand right now is we basically have about 53% gain year to date on that. And the summary of that is that we are at a very strong support or resistance, and anticipate a little bit of sell-off, a pullback, which might be a very short pullback. I'm hoping. We'll see what the AI says. From at this point, it looks like this pullback is going to be short. We are out of all of them except one, Arna, and other than that, we are doing amazing on the since inception and from the year to date this year. Please see my updated email address. This is an email address which is specific for the C3 fund, which is specifically for the cannabis index and cannabis investment. So please make a note of that, and that's where most of our investments and investment fund and marketing and everything is happening from there. So that's all I have for you, Josh, today. Thank you so much.
Looks good. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if there is that correction. How, since we only have one security, we're not going to be losing that much. So if it does trigger the sell, those other funds are going to be losing dramatically. So
Right.
On the upside, we're kind of we're doing just as well as they are, but on the downside, we're doing a lot better. And you can see that in the year to date and since inception returns, as well as just cumulative. You look month over month at how we're doing versus MJ and POTX is substantially better. And I think during corrections in times of volatility, we're going to do a lot better because the AI algorithm doesn't really have that emotion so much as a day trader sitting behind a screen having to make those decisions. So I will be interested to see if there's a correction, how we fare versus the competition. We are starting to see some new resistance, new support levels. So things are starting to move. But I think we're going to do a lot better than a competition. But you have to come back to the Talking Hedge and find out. So with that, we're going to roll this one up. I want to thank my guest, Rohit Srivastava, Chief Investment Officer and Portfolio Manager with C3 Fund. Rohit, thanks for being back on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Josh.
I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And
how do cannabis CEOs balance growth and optimization strategies? What is THCO, Delta-10, and CBNA, and why should you care about these minor cannabinoids? And why isn't the endocannabinoid system covered in medical school? Most people think they're up to date in trends in the cannabis industry, but they're about 6 weeks behind. Learn about what is truly next in the cannabis space by joining myself, Brian Fields, and Kellen Finney every week on the Dime Podcast, and of course, on PodConnects.